The thoughts and opinions expressed in this podcast do not reflect that of Lyfeblerd. Enjoy the show. Hi, you're listening to Lyfeblerd, a podcast about manga, manhwa, light novels, and other types of comic books. I'm your host, Cryptte, the Ancient Blood, and I'm here to geek out on all the good stuff. So, if you like what you hear, let's go. In this episode, we enter the long, dark, desolate corridors of Blame. It's a manga written by Tsutomu Nihei, and for this review, I read the Master Edition. However, I haven't been able to finish the series yet, so this episode only covers the first 3 volumes out of 6. It's a manga that combines two of my favorite things, science fiction and seinen. There's a whole lot of psychological horror and I can't wait to get into it with you.
Story!
Blame is a cyberpunk story set in a post-apocalyptic world that has gone mad with disease. Humanity is seemingly on the brink of extinction, with many genetically altered. Our hero, Kiri, is a loner and silent protagonist with a voice that he prefers not to use much. Kinda like me. He travels the city, a cyber megalopolis that has outgrown our world and spans an extremely vast distance beyond. It is ever expanding thanks to mindless machines called builders, whose sole purpose is to keep building. These automatons share the world with humans, cybernetic silicon life, and their enigmatic safeguards. Facing peril after peril, Kiri rises up the city's innumerable layers to find humans with a thing called the net terminal gene. It's some sort of genetic marker or something from the world's past that served as a man-machine interface, which allowed humanity to access a super internet called the net sphere. This is another one of those stories about perils of AI and technology and all that stuff from a relatively different perspective. Imagine if you invest in the best security for your home and then one day lock yourself out. That's more or less what has happened here. Only this time, the net sphere is connected to the city, its systems, and even the builders. This means the city will continue to expand forever. Man becomes an endangered animal, and no more internet. The horror. Now, normally, I wouldn't give you guys this much information up front, but the thing about Blame Volume 1 is that it willingly provides very little information. You learn what's going on mostly from the deep and complex panels of art that chronicle Kiri's journey. The dialogue in that first 400-page book is less than any first issue of any comic I've ever read. But rest assured, there's a story here and it's a deep one if you give it a chance. Along the way, Kiri meets a host of characters like Sibo, the scientist, Sute, the Electro Fisher, and Sanakan the Meek. Some of them join him on his quest while the majority die quick and miserable deaths.
Plus or minus.
Volume 1 leaves you with a lot of questions, and like I mentioned earlier, dialogue is particularly sparse. But together they made me very curious enough to get my hands on Volume 2 and 3, and enough to also check out the prequel Noise. The first volume focuses mostly on setting the atmosphere and world building, which I believe is why Volume 2 begins with a flashback that helps explain some of the circumstances at the end of the first volume. Because of that, I don't think you can get a complete picture of Blame until you read up to Volume 2. It's not necessarily a good or bad thing unless you're on a serious budget because the Master Edition is not cheap. But I think the mangaka's intent was to drive us crazy with enough suspense to keep reading. The fact that I did in fact keep reading means it worked too. Here are most of the things I loved and loathed about Blame. I'm a sucker for grunge art. Just look at Versus logo. The art of Blame has a deep, dark personality that sucks you into its terrifying world. The locations are meticulously crafted too, with the art reminiscent of charcoal drawings or Japanese sumie. If you've watched or read Bakuman, the manga, or anime, then you should remember the scene where we're told one of the requirements for mangas to get published in magazines to be able to tell a story without words. Blame does that superbly in Volume 1, and there are chapters in other volumes that pull it off too. This manga is not for the impatient as it's filled to the brim with suspense. It's nothing like Indian soap operas, and if you stick with it long enough, the payoff is big and satisfying. The creature designs are cool and scary at the same time. The safeguards are spooky and shiny smooth. Silicon Life have cybernetic limbs all over the place, and the transhumans look very alien. And let's not forget the very robotic builders and the techno-organic imagery. I mentioned the art style here too because as much as I love it, there are many times when it was unclear what was going on in page. It was far from a deal breaker, but a little annoying that I couldn't tell wind, swipes, slashes, and stuff like that apart. Another issue regarding the art is how depressing situations and locations were in the book. Blame is definitely not for the faint of heart, but I think it should have some sort of warning and age rating. Otherwise, it could become a trigger for those with poor mental health. Many of the characters look at like forcing me to track some of them using their clothing, injuries, and so forth. If only they looked as distinctive as their facial expressions.
Conclusion.
Nihei-san's first manga was a one-shot called Blame. The Jiro Taniguchi special prize-winning submission clearly shares more than just the title of Blame. We see Kiri in law enforcement, his trusty gun with lots of destructive force at his side and some sort of techno-organic creature in his sights. In my opinion, Blame is a much better tale, with even the fantastical aspects of the story told in a convincing voice. His art also evolved into our charcoal grunge fest that makes his work uniquely cyberpunk. One of the most intriguing things about Blame is how the city, their world, is like a living organism. Within it we have an infection, humanity, white blood cells, safeguards, and all the other impurities and mutations living like parasites and tumors. Yes, Blame should be read by fans of sci-fi and psychological horror. It ticks all the right dystopian and cyberpunk boxes, but that's exactly why it won't be for everyone. I vision most people will either be for or against it, no middle ground. I intend to read all remaining 3 volumes of the manga, and the huge but fancy master edition has become part of a collection I'd like to complete. It's heavy though, so watch your wrist if you get this version. It's also available online on viz.com, Amazon, and a few other digital storefronts in Japanese.
Reading list.
If you're a fan of Blame, then you should check out other works by Nihei-san. Take a look at his one-shot Blame and Noise, the prequel to Blame. That's the second Blame, not the first Blame. I don't think Noise's writing is any special, but I'm adding it to the reading list because it's sort of an origin story. The concepts introduced are intriguing, and we also get to see the origins of Silicon Life and the safeguards. Then there's Biomega, which takes several references from Blame. If you've heard me gush and still don't think Blame is for you, then give another one of its spin-offs a chance. It's the same character stuck in a funny high school drama. It's called Blame Academy and so on. This episode is all about cyberpunk, so pick up Appleseed by Masamune Shirow. Not only is it written and drawn by one of my favorite mangakas. This episode is all about cyberpunk, so pick up Appleseed by Masamune Shirow. Not only is it written and drawn by one of my favorite mangakas, but it's much lighter than Blame. I'm not talking sunshine and rainbows, but it's a fine mix of action, adventure, and comedy with all the other things you'd expect of a sci-fi tale. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Lyfeblerd. If you did, please review and rate on iTunes and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. Using the links provided to purchase any of the books mentioned during the show greatly help us keep the lights on, so thanks in advance. The theme song is called Dreams, provided by Argofox and created by Rewayde. See you in the next layer. Bye.